Hey, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you on this Thursday morning. Thanks for coming to our Northern Forest Bird Network webinar. We'll have this the second Thursday at 10 a.m. each month this year. And luckily this month we have Kiandra Rajala. She is going to give a presentation on social science. And just a little bit about her, I'll kind of read a bio. She is a regional social scientist for the Midwest region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She's based in Social Applications Program, and Kiandra works across the U.S. Fish and Wildlife programs and with external partners to address the human dimensions and social dynamics of conservation through social science insights, application, and integration. Kiandra's previous research and current professional interests include private lands conservation, understanding people's relationships with places and preferences for ecosystem services, identifying, constraining, and enabling factors related to the key conservation behaviors, and enhancing collaborative conservation. So thank you, Kiandra, for being here today. I know part of the joint venture is we want to care for birds and care for people. So I think this is going to be really helpful for us to get this overview of social science within the Fish and Wildlife Service. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jamie, and thanks everyone for being here today. I see a few names I recognize in the participants and several that I don't. So it's always great to see familiar names and faces and then also meet new folks. With that, I'm going to just get my screen sharing set up here. Oh boy, we had this figured out, Jamie. I've lost my, okay. All right, are y'all seeing a title slide?
Yep, it looks good.
Great. All right. Well, thanks again. And thanks for reading that introduction, Jamie. It always, sounds a little better when you're typing it yourself and then you realize you've made someone read some really long sentences about you. But I wanted to just kick this off by giving you all a moment to think about what the social aspects of bird conservation or conservation at large are. And I know we just started, but I am going to pause for a minute here and encourage you to share any ideas you might have in the chat. Right, seeing human threats come in. Yeah, political support, working with communities, partnerships. Yeah, getting people connected with nature. All right. Well, I can tell this presentation is going to land with y'all today. So when you were thinking about some of those big categories, I've grouped things into 4 big buckets. First off, we can, recognize that people both impact and are impacted by the natural environment. And this is large scale, right? Things like climate change, land use, landscape fragmentation, to smaller scale, context-specific human-wildlife interactions, be they for better or for worse. We know that we want people to coexist with wildlife in ways that have minimal impact on species and also reduce those undesirable or costly impacts for people. People also hold a range of values for wildlife, and especially for birds, as well as the places that comprise their habitats. People use wildlife and natural resources in a variety of ways, including livelihoods and subsistence, recreation, cultural connections and practices, and many more. I'm sure this is no surprise for this group, that much of the work we accomplish in conservation, we accomplish through partnership, whether that's within our own agencies, with other agencies and organizations, or with individuals, communities, or governments at various scales. And finally, if we think about, our governance paradigm for wildlife and the publics that we serve and the partners we work with, not only do people want to be meaningfully engaged in decisions that we as resource trustees make, increasingly they demand it. And in many cases, that is actually our job, to seek out meaningful involvement and engagement. And if we work for federal agencies, to fulfill our trust responsibility to federally recognized tribes. So given that we're all people and you all probably already work in partnership, you might be wondering, why pause? Amidst the growing urgency of our conservation issues, why pause and take a social science lens to our work? And I would just back up for a minute here and say that when we think about the complexities of the human animal, right, our behaviors and our social processes that govern our societies, we can look to social science as almost this superpower that can help disentangle, demystify, and bring some degree of order. And not to say that, our intuitive approaches for working with people are never on track, but given those complexities in the social realm and the biases that we as people all carry, social science really can help inform our approaches from an evidence base and help accelerate what we might be learning through trial and error. I think this evidence base is especially important when we seek to work with new and non-traditional partners, rather than simply going on our assumptions or the strategies that we're most comfortable with. And we can think about the value add to the Northern Forest Bird CDN and your vision for thriving, diverse Northern Forest bird communities across BCR 12. When reviewing the CDN's goals to reach that vision, I see major alignment with things like information sharing, coordination and collaboration, using the best available science, and monitoring to inform and evaluate management practices. And don't worry if you don't see all of those connection points right now. That's why Jamie gave me this whole hour with you. So speaking about our time together, I want to start out with an example that I think really demonstrates the business case for social science and how this can accelerate our conservation work. I'll then give an overview about conservation social sciences, as some of us might be very familiar with these disciplines and their approaches, and others might be wondering what exactly it means when the word social and the word science are used back to back in a sentence like that. And then finally, we'll wrap up today with some tools and resources and hopefully have a bit of time for questions and discussion. So some of you might be familiar with this example from Playa Lakes joint venture in the Central Plains of using social science to understand relevance of and barriers to conservation actions, and then use that information to design a conservation program. So playas, as shown here, are these shallow temporary wetlands that collect runoff. Playas are the most numerous type of wetland in this 6-state region, and playas and their surrounding grassland buffers provide critical wildlife habitat. Historically, most of the USDA playa conservation programs and the messaging around benefits of playa conservation had focused on wildlife and birds specifically. Playas, however, also improve water quality and recharge in the Ogallala aquifer, which, if you're already thinking ahead, may or may not be important to the people who live and work in this region. So over the course of about 10 years, Playa Lakes Joint Venture conducted landowner surveys and focus groups, gaining insight into the importance of aquifer to landowners, the uncertainty they might have had about playa's role in providing recharge, and also looking to understand the barriers landowners faced when it came to enrolling in the existing playa conservation programs. With this information, Playa Lakes worked with partners to develop a new innovative conservation program that incorporated what had been the importance of aquifer recharge as a motivation for conservation, as well as considering landowners' operational needs in the program's design and subsequently how they marketed it. So the result, along with this new approach to the program design, from shifting that focus from the benefits to the birds in the sky to the water in the ground, Kansas alone saw more acres enrolled in the first 17 months of the new program than had been enrolled in any other playa conservation program in the previous 25 years. In addition to this huge increase in the number of acres, they were also in higher priority areas based on social and ecological data that could inform spatial targeting for enrollment. And sticking with my fun animations here, which I really like, I also want to highlight that just because our emphasis on the birds got fainter, that does not at all mean that we lose them from this picture. In fact, it means that we have more acres benefiting both the birds in the sky and the water in the ground, where it makes the most impact on the landscape. So I want to encourage you all to start thinking about, what is that aquifer recharge message or messages within your areas of BCR 12, that lens of relevance, the issues that already matter to people and can overlap with conservation of priority species, where we can accelerate adoption of key actions and behaviors through finding those stacked social and ecological benefits. All right, so I'm hoping if that was new to you all, that you're pretty intrigued about this business case and the potential return on investment for integrating social science, and ready to learn a little bit more about what social sciences are. So I think it's really helpful to start broadly with an emphasis on the science part. Social science is just like normal science in that it follows systematic and rigorous methods to investigate and understand some phenomena of interest. What is distinct and often intimidating for folks, I think, is that the focus of study in social science is not typically physical or tangible, but instead social. Social phenomena like culture and norms, social processes like communicating and decision-making. Also individual attributes, which range from things that we can directly observe, like people's behaviors, to things we can't directly observe, like people's values and beliefs. So just as the natural sciences are made of a wide variety of disciplines, so are the social sciences. And within conservation and environmental management, there are important human and social considerations that happen at different scales, creating value for this wide variety of disciplines that each bring their own theories and methods with associated strengths and weaknesses to understand these different topics on the right. For instance, disciplines like anthropology and sociology can help us understand the social phenomena of culture, whereas disciplines like psychology are more useful when trying to understand individual behaviors. I also want to point out, because this often gets conflated, that the science guided by any of these disciplines in the wheel is different than the topic of study on the right. For instance, there can certainly be a lot of synergy between some of those very applied social sciences and processes like communicating or engagement, but social science typically refers to when you're studying, informing, or evaluating those processes and not the process of engagement itself, if that's making sense to folks. And again, just to kind of highlight this idea of scale, we know that these different scales matter within the context of conservation and natural resource management. And it's important to recognize, that range of potentially relevant social topics and units of analysis Often it's easy to focus on that local and individual level, not recognizing kind of the larger policy context that individuals make decisions within. So drawing on those varied social science disciplines and thinking about those potential topics, we might ask and answer a range of research questions. Things like looking at culture and relationship with wildlife, really examining our conservation goals and our target audiences, thinking about behavior change, and also the overall impacts of our work on human well-being. So when to integrate social science? As a starting place, we can think about integrating social sciences within these 4 main phases of planning and implementation. And we can certainly map this onto strategic habitat conservation with its very similar phases that you may be familiar with. The framework on the left comes from Rebecca Nemec and colleagues in recent work that I think will be really seminal in moving from doing social science on conservation to actually integrating social science into conservation. They outline a framework which they then apply to a case study of wolf reintroduction in Colorado, really highlighting some of the opportunities and also some of the challenges. So as we think about each of these phases, social science might be integrated and show up differently throughout. To successfully and effectively integrate social science, it's really important to try to start incorporating this at the onset of project planning. Here we can get a more complete picture of the social aspects and power dynamics of the problem and the social ecological context in which our interventions may later be applied. A better understanding of the problem or the issue can also help inform building an inclusive and diverse team that has varying knowledge, perspectives, and interests well suited to address that context of the problem and its potential solutions. When we look to develop goals and objectives, we might seek out existing social science research to understand where there may be conflict or consensus, or where certain groups of people may be positively or negatively impacted. Perhaps the situation is one in which we can draw on some of those social science best practices to inform collaboration and co-development of goals and objectives with the people or the groups who will be impacted. Anytime I hear about efforts to work with private landowners or potentially whole communities that may be impacted by, impending climate change, I see, this huge value for social science within this phase of developing goals and objectives, as well as how our goals and objectives can inform the next phase, our conservation interventions or strategies. So here, we're talking about things like the policies, programs, or specific projects we may use to achieve our intended results. A social science lens can be really beneficial here, helping us examine those assumptions about how exactly we expect our conservation intervention to work and who specifically is likely to experience any potential benefits or harms. Ideally, we want to inform our actions from an evidence base, following a logic model or process of change, increasing our likelihood of successful and sustainable outcomes by accounting for that social context of our work. And finally, this gold standard. We can track social and social ecological indicators to monitor and evaluate the success, limitations, and potentially unintended social consequences of our conservation work. As with any type of adaptive management, we know that having an effective feedback loop is critical to help us improve the effectiveness and efficiency of our work. In conservation, we often make claims towards the human and social benefits of what we do, but actually monitoring and evaluating those claims are important accountability mechanisms to our funders, our constituents, and hopefully to our own kind of ethical imperatives and responsibilities. So this may or may not have been what you all were thinking about when writing that fourth goal for the CDN related to monitoring and research that can be used to inform and evaluate management practices. But I really see strong alignment and potential for integration there. So putting together those different disciplines of social science, different potential topics of study, research questions, how to integrate social science into planning and implementation, we can kind of step back to this 30,000-foot view and think about major contributions of social science. For conservation, this could be descriptive or diagnostic contributions. Can also help us challenge the status quo and think about disruptive and reflexive contributions. We can use the social sciences to generate innovative approaches, right? Thinking back to that Playa Lakes Conservation Program example. And finally, all of these stack up to instrumental contributions, right? Helping us accomplish our conservation goals. So with that, I want to just share a few tools and resources that you all can access and dig into as your time allows. And I'm not going to touch on everything here, but wanted to just give an idea of kind of this spectrum that's out there. And, you know, if you're looking to connect with expertise or find, you know, more general information, we've got you. If you're looking to understand more about your kind of community context and the audiences you engage with, there are a number of great spatial and publicly available data tools. Additionally, great tips on engaging with people and partners, and then finally exploring some of those additional conservation success stories. So I have a few more slides. I'm going to just highlight some of the things listed here. So this Equity and Social Science Data and Tools Hub is an aggregation of over 15 open access spatial and data resources from a variety of public agencies that can help us better understand aspects of equity, environmental justice, and human well-being. For instance, the climate mapping for resilience and adaptation assessment tool that's shown in this upper right tile allows users to explore how projected changes to climate conditions may impact community assets like property and infrastructure, maybe cueing us into where there may be some of those stacked social and ecological benefits of certain conservation actions. One tool that you can find on that hub, but I also want to call out individually, is the socioeconomic profile tool. And we know that the US population is changing, right? Along with overall growth, we're becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. Our income inequality has grown. We have generational changes, like millennials recently surpassing baby boomers as the largest adult generation. These and other population changes vary greatly across the country by state, county, rural and urban areas, and from neighborhood to neighborhood. We need to understand these changes to become more effective at engaging people in conservation. This socioeconomic profile tool is a web-based application developed by Headwaters Economics in close partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Service that provides customized reports on various socioeconomic conditions around the areas where they work. The tool is free and gives some really user-friendly outputs that you can download on the fly in Excel or as PDFs. So highly recommend checking out this tool if you're not already familiar. We also have an engagement wayfinder that's an online resource hub for orientation to public, stakeholder, and partner engagement. And this provides various resources with guidance to help start planning ways to meaningfully engage, along with potential techniques to use, case study examples, and a variety of resources. I think this is a great site for people with varying levels of engagement, whether you're brand new or already a subject matter expert. The Wayfinder is really anchored around this spectrum of public participation or engagement. And as you move from inform to empower, the people that you are looking to engage with have an increasing impact on the decision. Often we think that, most of our effective engagement happens in the middle of the spectrum. And sometimes we aren't legally able to go to that empower level with decision-making if you're dealing with certain regulatory responsibilities. But it is important to kind of consider this full spectrum. And let's say you want to learn more about empowering. Each of these levels here has this different promise to the people that you're working with, and also helps clarify that decision space and your role. So again, all the content on this Wayfinder, like techniques and resources, link back to these different levels of engagement on the spectrum. And there really are resources galore. So again, if that Playa Lakes conservation example caught your attention, you might be interested in exploring NABC's Human Dimensions success stories to see where there might be direct insights into your work or potentially approaches that you could apply to your context. Just a few of the stories on there include successes around changing people's behavior as it relates to dog walkers, or I believe keeping campsites clean for purple martins, and also how to understand ways to connect and engage with landowners to promote early successional habitat and golden-winged warbler conservation. Those were based in the Northeast, but I can imagine for this group, there'd be some strong relevance into our work. And finally, if you are just itching to learn more, I encourage you to keep the Human Dimensions Foundations course on your radar. Myself and other Fish and Wildlife Service social scientists teach this class annually, and it's open to federal employees, state employees. I imagine folks from different conservation organizations would also be welcome and able to attend. So happy to share more information about that if anyone is interested. And I think with that, it's kind of all the slides I had today. I'd like to, end with some kind of reflection questions. And just encourage you to think about, whether it's now or later on in your day, what here most relates to your work, maybe what was most surprising, and then what are those one or two things that you can carry forward in your work? Maybe it's something you change, maybe it's something you lean into and do more of. So with that, I will stop screen sharing and happy to hear anyone's thoughts to these reflection questions or take any questions you may all have for me.
Thank you, Kiandra. That was fantastic. You're getting some claps. Does anybody want to share what most relates to them or what's surprising from today's presentation and how they can move forward with social science?
I have a question. Hey, Kiandra, I'm Sarah Kendrick. I'm with the Migrate program in Region 3. And while this isn't Northern Forest specific, so I apologize, I don't want to take the focus off of that. We're working in Missouri statewide on some urban bird efforts, and I'm just really interested in motivations of how we get business owners and municipalities on board, and we're kind of moving into that. I didn't know if you had any experience with that. It's just a little bit more maybe tangential where we're just asking them to do, trying to find out how to motivate folks to just do the right thing when there's no direct benefit to them to like treat a window, And so I think some of us, I don't want to speak for anyone, but I certainly come up against this wall of like some challenges where it's hard to kind of find those other motivations where it would help, tied to human values and directly help a human when it's a relatively easy fix if it's something like treating windows. So anyway, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, or if you have any experience with that, or maybe we can follow up and discuss at a later time.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I know I've seen your name and
Yeah.
probably at a number of things, but I don't think we've actually had a
I
chance
know.
to connect. I think that, it's a great question and brings in that importance of knowing your audience and recognizing that difference between, the individual citizen and maybe a municipal government or a business. I don't have any resources offhand, but I know that the Fish and Wildlife Service, in partnership with others, just hosted a big kind of collision lights out summit and had a big focus on behavior change strategies. Okay. So I don't know if you were able to attend that, but I am eagerly awaiting, kind of a report out, because they did bring in a heavy hitter behavior change expert to kind of lead these groups through, workshopping that. So I think that's one resource we can kind of look to for more information. And within that, I don't know, kind of the corporate realm, I think, the concept of norms, right? The influence of social pressure still applies in kind of a different way when you think about, constituencies. And so thinking about the, relevance, maybe not to a specific business or a municipality, but to their constituents. And anytime you can kind of dig in and get some of that additional information, the data, I think can be helpful, but that might be something to explore a little further and look, I think it's always good to look at like what other examples exist when we're trying to kind of shift decisions at that scale with that audience. But thanks so much for your question.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was great.
You bet. And also everyone, I'll make sure to share with Jamie and you all the slides here, because there are a lot of good links to various resources.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That is definitely relatable to Northern Forest, because it's a similar motivating folks and landowners to do simple things to support birds can be difficult, and working with like industry timber, it's very similar. Anyone else have a good burning question? Mike North has a comment about creating a local awards and recognition program. Good publicity gets people's attention. Definitely a good suggestion.
Yeah, and that can tap into some of that normative influence as well.
Any other questions? I can throw out some of my questions, maybe stir up some people. Frank?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I've done a little bit of social science work before in the conservation field. More specifically, that was with like farmers in Michigan. I think that aspect of conservation is pretty recognized as a valuable tool there, but I do still think that the conservation field in general kind of forgets about the social sciences sometimes. And so when we realize how important that is, one of the biggest limiting factors sometimes is funding. I mean, funding is the limiting factor for almost everything. So if I missed it, I apologize, but I'm curious if there's any like really good sources for, I work for a land trust, so maybe like nonprofits to kind of look at to kind of kickstart more of a social science program. I think about, with those farmers, we sent out questionnaires basically to kind of get an idea of our demographics and what was important to them. So my
Mhm.
question for you, Kiandra, is do you know of any funding sources basically to conduct this kind of work?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think, you know, in the research realm, there certainly are some funders, and you know, anytime you're looking at kind of the social ecological systems, I mean, like big funders like National Science Foundation have, I think they have called it coupled human and natural systems funding streams. Also tying into you know, funding that might be focused around climate change adaptation or One Health, some of these really relevant issues. I mean, they all have a social component, and we can work to find that alignment, right, of the conservation work and goals that we're doing. So I think those might be some good areas to explore. You know, I know kind of AFWA and MAFWA have funding for multi-state grants, and maybe the potential to partner with, you know, each state. Well, most states have a human dimensions or social scientist, and maybe partnering there at the state level and thinking about how you might coordinate something. And I think we are, you know, just like you said, it's like many are recognizing the value. We're still kind of making that case and trying to encourage more funding towards social science. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of collaborate on issues. And, you know, when there's current research, the context often varies, and there are some things you need to kind of check or replicate to ensure that it might transfer to your context. But there are often those underlying fundamentals that you know, are true of similar people in most contexts. And oh yeah, seeing another example here in the chat. But I know I've heard this question come up before, and some good suggestions towards, you know, even just better aggregating, like what are those different potential funding sources. And I haven't done that yet, but man, I would love if somebody did. So thanks for asking that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Frank. That was a great question. Any other burning questions for Kiandra? I have a question for you, if no one else feels like chiming in right now. I was curious, on one of your slides, you talked about like it was like a flow. It looked like one of your decision support tools. And the last one was the empowering, and like how some of us aren't able to do that. And I was curious on if you had any suggestions on how to effectively inform those who can empower some of the findings that we have. I feel like that's something, just like informing management decisions and getting to that like policy level, there's a lot of barriers there, or it's just really hard to get some messages out. So I'm curious if you have any suggestions on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that consideration of like the sphere of influence you have, and also the decision space that's available is really important kind of pre-work. And not all the time, but I think in general, we are trying to move towards allowing, you know, the public or partners to have greater influence on a decision. So less of that top-down, expert-driven, and more of that, you know, collaboration or empowerment. And I think, you know, looking for, maybe it's not a whole decision, right? Like, we are not going to empower others to make like listing decisions, right, for threatened or endangered species. But there might be aspects of a recovery plan that we could empower groups at various levels to actually make decisions that they themselves could, then better implement within a recovery strategy.
Mhm.
Is maybe how I would think about that. And in terms of, the kind of information sharing piece, there's a lot of nuance into kind of communications and information sharing, especially, depending on that objective. Like, is it simply to inform? Is it to kind of inspire connection? Or is it to motivate action? And when we're trying to be persuasive and motivate action, that like strategic communication space, I think, yeah, tapping into some of those resources and, really considering things like the message source and the channel, as well as the content of the information we're sharing. So happy to provide some resources on that with an email as well.
Awesome. That's super helpful. And it's a lot to think about too when, planning projects and stuff, like how to start thinking about it at the beginning of your planning process and the communications. And I know within the joint venture, like we've been talking about like how to better communicate some of these things, and that's kind of something we were focusing on in the next year or so. And not so much just communication of like the things that we're being successful with, but also getting down to that social science aspect within our joint venture. So
Yeah. And I'd imagine, like basically the infrastructure, the conservation delivery network. I mean, you all are set up so well to have, right, those kind of individual nodes, organizations, right, in this network who may already sort of be credible and be trusted within their networks then. And so, there are, right, very like rigorous, fancy social network analyses, but even just mapping some of that out and having an idea of, who might be the best message source among the various nodes in your conservation delivery network when it comes to, certain types of messages for certain audiences. So I think that could be an exciting place to lean in as well.
absolutely. But do you have any other?
Since there's no other questions, can I just advocate for, this is Mike North, creating award and recognition programs for people that do great things for the environment and are accomplishing what you want to accomplish, because that can get the message out. We had a homeowner in Gull Lake here in Minnesota who the builder of their house got a National Builders Association award for building this beautiful house, but what they did to the lakeshore was an abomination. And so several of us created a counter award to recognize people who did the right thing with their lakeshore by building and meeting all the setbacks and incorporating other positive environmental things and doing shoreline restoration. And those award winners got recognition on television, on radio, in newspapers and magazines. And it was really a great tool to for other people to see what others were doing that we wanted to accomplish. And I could see doing that in the urban setting in Missouri, for example. If you can get one organization to do something, give them an award, get it out there in the media, and other people will see and follow suit. So I'm just thinking with our Forestry for Minnesota Birds, we could do that down the road when somebody implements some of our recommendations, so it's a feel good thing and it helps get the message out. So I would encourage people to think about that. And sorry for getting on the soapbox rather than asking a question.
That's great.
Thank you.
We're definitely thinking about peer pressure and how to like invite Kansas City and St. Louis and be like, oh, they're both attending, they're both like major collision cities. And so, yeah, we're trying to key in on that for sure.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing that, Mike. And I mean, whether whether you knew it or not, yeah, you're definitely tapping into some of the evidence around behavior change. And I think those recognition structures can be really effective for a number of reasons. But one thing I wanted to just expand on, you know, from what you were saying, often we think that to change behavior, we should highlight the bad stuff, right? Don't do this, it's really bad. But actually, depending on context, most of the time, if we highlight the desired behavior and what's good and who's doing it, that can be more effective. And sometimes, yes, we need to say like, you know, stop at this stop sign, or point out the bad behavior. And then you still want to provide the example of what you should be doing. But I think, yeah, for a variety of reasons, yeah, systems like that to kind of recognize the people who are doing good conservation work are really awesome. So thanks.
Yeah, and I'll read Anna's comment about the Fish and Wildlife Collision Summit. It was suggested that messaging and communication should be focused on the success and positive stories versus the doom and gloom of the bird collisions and how many birds are dying, etc. Like it really, like, you know, the Chicago situation in the fall caught the attention of people, but it's like from there, I agree, like move forward with that positive reinforcement. And to build off Mike's, you know, comment, the Forestry for Birds also has like an endorsement program. So like when we get Forestry for Minnesota and like Michigan's already talking about it, but and Wisconsin, if we have like an endorsement program for foresters or landowners that are doing forestry for birds work on their properties or within their conservation plans and stuff. So definitely something we'll be thinking about for Forestry for Minnesota, Mike, and we can talk about it in the future. But that's kind of catching a lot of steam. It's kind of just another program for foresters to get endorsed for doing all these fun things for birds. Thanks, Anna, for that comment. Definitely focusing on the positives. Any other thoughts or questions? Well, quiet group today. You just did such a good job.
Yeah, you have some extra time to start exploring those tools and resources.
Yeah.
Thinking
Yeah,
about how to carry this forward.
Yes, I will share all of those links that you have, and then I will also put them with our YouTube recording so people can come back to them when they're planning their projects and want to integrate that social science aspect. But thank you so much, Kiandra, for presenting. I learned so much today, and I'm excited to put social science in the forefront of my mind because it's, as a biologist, all I think about is like birds and ground, you know, what we're doing on the ground. So it's good to look at the humans too and take care of our humans within our region as well. So thank
Right.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
yeah,
everybody.
you bet. Thanks you all, and feel free to reach out. I can't promise an immediate response, but I would love to hear any questions or follow-ups you might have, and we'll eventually get back to you. So take care,
Yep.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.